Good morning, everybody. For those of you who are aghast at how empty the discourse is and how depressing all the invective is in this election, invective is a fancy word for mudslinging. Let's look at some colorful language from some earlier elections. Here are some vignettes from two earlier American elections. Some of you will know this from your U.S. history classes, perhaps, but it's still fun to go through them a little bit. Election of 1800, famously hard fought between incumbent Federalist candidate John Adams and Democratic Republican Thomas Jefferson, or rather between their partisans. They did not actively campaign in the election, as far as I know. We see the Jeffersonian operatives calling John Adams, quote, these are exact quotations, quote, a rageful, lying, warmongering fellow, unquote. A repulsive pedant. A pedant is sort of an excessively scholarly scholar. And quote unquote, a gross hypocrite. They go on about Adams. He is a blind, bald, crippled, toothless man who is of a hideous hermaphroditic character, with neither the force and fitness of a man nor the gentleness and sensibility of a woman. Adams' Federalist allies returned fire. Jefferson is an atheist. If he, an infidel, is elected, the God-fearing will have to hide their Bibles and their daughters. Should the infidel, this is a different one, but they like the word infidel. Should the infidel, Jefferson, be elected to the presidency, the seal of death is that moment set on our holy religion. Our churches will be brought down, unquote. They went on with classical imagery of ideas as sort of statuary allegory. Think of the Lady Liberty in New York or New Jersey Harbor. They went on. We'll have in place of the sanctuaries now devoted to the Most High, that's to the Christian God, Judeo-Christian God, we will have some infamous statue of a prostitute if Jefferson is elected under the title of Goddess of Reason. She will preside in those sanctuaries. As you know, Jefferson was elected and none of that happened. The Bibles were okay, the virgins were okay, the churches were okay. Here's my second example of famous political rhetoric from an earlier election. The language cast against Abraham Lincoln. During the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858, Douglas accused Lincoln of being a drunk. Quote, the man drinks more liquor than all the boys in town together, unquote. The language used against Lincoln in his elections was so colorful that Harper's Weekly, a famous sort of the Instagram of the 1850s and 1860s, made a list of epithets slung at Lincoln. Here's the list: buffoon, usurper, monster, scoundrel, perjurer, robber, swindler, tyrant, field butcher, land pirate, filthy storyteller, despot, liar, thief, and braggart. Lincoln was portrayed mercilessly as an ape, by the way, if you look at some of the political cartoons from back then. Indeed, in 1864, Lincoln's opponent, George McClellan, said, ignoramus Abe is a well-meaning baboon. At least McClellan called him well-meaning. So vapidity and mudslinging, emptiness and mudslinging, while depressing, are nothing new. Back to what my classes told me I hope that means you, want to hear about. In particular, a consistent theme I heard from them was the really two consistent themes I heard from them were these. First, American politics feels to them broken. And second, the solution is not likely to come at the level of great ideas or of some sort of Superman or Superwoman who will inspire us and lead us all out of the current state of affairs. Rather, my students, and my third formers in particular, felt that a better country, a better society, a better commonwealth will come when we start behaving better toward each other in the ordinary course of our ordinary lives. So I thought about that a little bit, increasingly convinced that indeed we need to listen better to third formers. My thinking led me to two places I'd like to tell you about in the balance of my talk. It led me away from the purely personal and rather to the interpersonal, and specifically to the sort of structured form of interpersonal, which I think is institutions. Institutions like the Hill School, for example. My thinking also led me away from the international and the national politics and all of that that drives so much of political discourse to the regional and to the local and to the small. Now, this might take some heavy lifting. Respect for institutions, for their rituals, and for those who run and staff them is low and it's unfashionable. Pessimism, cynicism abound, and those are in fact fashionable. A recent poll says 21% of Americans like Congress, and that's actually up from 13% earlier in the year. Nobody likes large corporations. Even not-for-profits get beat up a lot. And all one needs to do is look at the lively press around here to see aspects of Hill getting beat up there. We all have tales of how great harm was done to so-and-so by an institution. Sometimes it's quote-unquote the system that made the quote-unquote wrong decision. We even have a word with someone's sinister connotations, to be institutionalized, which I think means that when you leave next Friday for at least a week or so, you'll be deinstitutionalized. Institutions are big and they're complex, and however lofty their missions, they're staffed with imperfect human beings. Every time they make decisions, somebody's unhappy. Institutions define and they limit. But then again, places like the Hill, then again, so does almost every aspect of civilized life, because what institutions and more broadly civilization as a whole do is they call us to a higher purpose. They ask us to reach for a higher order in concert with others than to live in a mere state of nature, to live apart. They call us to an attempt through collective action and through ritual to achieve things together that we cannot achieve individually. The second place that my students' ideas led me to think about was to reflect on the quiet, patient, often introverted, little pitch for introverts out there and for the quiet, work of great leaders right now and in the future in all manner of smaller and largely local institutions. I reflect, and I ask you to reflect on how in the long run, the quality of those people and that work, the people that we actually interact with on a daily basis in our schools, in our churches, our teams, is probably more important to on the ground, real life for real people than the noise of national campaigns, the screaming of the press, the emptiness of so many political movements. If you find yourself a little alienated by the mess of Washington, look to all the good work that is done by local governments and local politicians, by people who are working in schools, in hospitals, and also in innovative private businesses of all sorts. These highly local, often small places are the crucibles where future statewide and national leadership is started. If you're an activist, and I know some of you are, of any stripe, if you think that you are going to advocate for political or social positions in either you're doing that now or you're going to do that in your future, that idea might give you a roadmap to where you can put your energies in your 20s and 30s and maybe for a lifetime. It isn't necessarily in a glamorous, supposedly glamorous place like Washington. If you're not an activist, if you're just a concerned citizen, that fact suggests that you look as much to, that opinion of mine suggests that you look as much to the issues facing your local town or city or community, perhaps your county, as much as the supposedly big issues in the nation's capital. I'm going to ask everybody to stop for a moment and close your eyes for about 10 seconds. Think as maybe 20 seconds. Think about a single event this year in which you achieved something personally that you could not have achieved without the help of others in an organized class or team or dorm or other group. Think about 20 seconds to just close your eyes and think about that. Something you could not have achieved without the help of others in an organized institutional setting. No peeking. You achieved something. Wasn't your achievement the result of a spirit of good faith, of optimism, confidence, giving, and genuine concern for and from the people around you in that circumstance? And was it not derived from connection with the people of a human-sized institution staffed by people trying their utmost to better their and your small corner of the world? In a sense, this is exactly what we sing in A Thousand Hands, where we ask to create our city on a hill, not a county or a state or a complete nation, but a city. 1,000 hands have labored long, mighty visions to fulfill, to shape a dream, to establish strong, this our city on the hill. So in conclusion, I'm with my students, both the third formers and with my more advanced Latin students who are now themselves, many of them are now themselves thoughtful voters. If you want to practice good citizenship, and if you're concerned, by all means vote, and by all means let the big issues of national and international politics be in your ken. But I'd like to ask you to think about what you can do personally to support the small, the local, often the newly established institutions of society, whether public or private. It is through that my students' vision of a better Commonwealth will come after we have structured our thinking, our private actions, and our institutions in a way that allow more just and fairer interactions in the ordinary course of our ordinary lives in ordinary spaces. Thanks for your time this morning.